right now. Joining me to go through all of the top stories is commentator Benedict Spence and his moustache.
So you saw through the disguise.
I saw through the disguise.
Oh, what a shame.
Now, if you are a long time listener to when we were just little old talk radio in our little studio, you may recall there was some digs over the years about this little thing that appears occasionally on your face. It's not an animal. It's not a hamster. He is not an extra from Narcos. They haven't got a new series, and he's not been basically moved in time from a porn film in the 1970s. This is actually Benedict Spence's face and his... Is this your Movember moustache?
Yes, it is my Movember moustache.
I mean...
Other genres of pornography are available, everybody, on
We are
makes the same
only
joke.
on the 8th of November. That is, if you don't mind me saying, a magnificently masculine effort.
This is the most masculine that I am ever when I'm growing
This is as good as it gets.
It is as good as it gets. I mean, every other aspect, I'm rather dainty and rather feminine, rather reclined.
Just talk about his tailor a lot. I'm thinking by the 30th of November, there's going to be handlebars and you could be plaiting them around the back of your head.
Yes, I like to...
By the way, if you're listening and not watching, you are missing something extraordinary here.
In my spare time during this month, I like to pretend I was a member of Bomber Command. I'd stand in front of a large map with my hands behind my back. It's the high point of my year.
Anyway, keep your messages of support coming in to Benedict's moustache that has to put up with being Benedict. Anyway, shall we talk about some stories?
Some actual
Shall we do some actual work? Let's do some work instead of just pretending we're sitting around the cafe. Right, let's talk about this pro-Palestinian protest. These are planned every Saturday. We've seen a number of them. They've been pretty unpleasant, frankly. A lot of the people, maybe just useful idiots, a lot of people very sincere about their concern for innocent civilians in Gaza, a concern I share. There are also some pretty nasty people who are shouting Hamas slogans and who genuinely think that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself or indeed a right to exist, and frankly, some blatant, outright anti-Semites. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
This march is seen as pretty provocative on Saturday. It is happening on Armistice Day. Remember, it's Sunday preparations, obviously, going on Saturday as well, ready for Sunday. But this is basically one of the most sacred days for the British people, where we mark those who have fallen for our right to do things like protest in the streets. The march is not going past the Cenotaph. No. Apparently, it is going from Hyde Park, it's going south, it's going to miss the Cenotaph and Whitehall completely. The Met Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, he insists that there is no law. He says he cannot ban the march, the protest on Armistice Day. He says even though the Prime Minister says it shouldn't go ahead, the Home Secretary says it shouldn't go ahead, she's called it a hate march, he says the march could only be banned in extreme circumstances, and the law, he says, provides no mechanism to ban a gathering, a static protest. Do you think he says there has to be a realistic threat of serious disorder? Do you think he's telling the truth?
I mean, I suspect that part is true, that there has to be a realistic threat. But I would like to know what his definition, therefore, is of a realistic threat, because marches have been prevented before. I think most of them have been far-right marches, things like the EDL.
EDL have been banned on numerous occasions.
Yeah, so
anti-capitalist groups, anti-globalists.
The idea that there is no mechanism is clearly not true, because he's contradicted himself by saying it's impossible. It's about threat. And I would argue that if there is good evidence to suggest that anti-Semitic slogans will be chanted, that businesses might be attacked based on whether or not they have ties to Israel, or even if they're just Jewish. Also, if there are supporters of Islamist terrorist organisations as well at this march, which we have seen before, I would argue actually that is a pretty good reason, be it from violence from the marchers or the prospect of a backlash to that. I would argue actually, yes, that is probably, in my opinion, grounds to prevent this happening. I suspect why they're not doing it is, A, they want the politicians to take the rap for it, so to be seen as, nasty, cruel Suella Braverman being a liberal. And also, they don't have the manpower, and they don't quite fancy having to get rid of 70,000.
I wonder if there were one of the Board of British Deputies of British Jews, if they decided to stage a protest against what happened in Israel, or a vigil for the hostages, and they decided to go to, for instance, a Bradford or some other area of the country or town or city where there was a strong Muslim community, I think the police would be very, very, very quick to ban it on the basis there could be a serious threat of disorder. Why? Because they think that the reaction to that protest would be violent. Now, because the reaction to the protest has not been violent, because Jewish people in this country don't have a history of reacting in a violent way to provocation that we've seen on our streets and to the fear that they are being subjected to, it's only now when far-right groups are saying they might act, football hooligans saying they're going to come and protect the Cenotaph. We've seen veterans groups, Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister, saying, please don't come. I think they've got every right to go. We've seen a cenotaph, we've seen a memorial I can't remember which city it was in, that bit has been defaced with Free Palestine on it. I mean, these are provocative actions.
I would ask anybody thinking of going to a counter-protest not to. For the
Why?
simple reason that you will be vilified. You will be blamed because there aren't as many of you as there are of the Palestine marches, and you can already
Maybe we should make sure there is. Maybe all right-thinking people should actually say, no, we're going to go along and we're going to make our voices known. Maybe the silent majority should be turning up.
If that was the case, if 100,000 people wanted to come and stand silently and all that, I would be in favour of that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, we're already hearing, they're talking about the far right, they're talking about football, always football hooligans in this country, isn't it? For some reason, they've got nothing better to do on a Saturday, even though there is football going on. They're all going to, you know,
I don't think. I mean, I'm not supporting for hooliganism, but I'm thinking protecting memorials to our fallen heroes.
But the point
seems to me to be a pretty bloody worthwhile way of spending a Saturday.
That is not how it's going to be portrayed. No. They are going to be portrayed as agitators, violent, and you can imagine front page of The Guardian the next day, the far right is on the march across Britain. That is how it will be portrayed, even though these are not the people instigating it. That is how it always goes. If you turn up to a counter-protest, you are the people who the police will photograph. You are the people that the police will ask to leave.
But isn't that part of the problem?
You are the people that will be arrested.
This is the thing. We see again and again. We've seen it when we, the Let Women Speak. Kelly J. Keane about women just saying the most blatant things like women are different from men, and standing up for women's most basic rights, but not being protected by the police until, frankly, there was an outcry about it. We are seeing a failure to arrest people carrying blatantly anti-Semitic, racist placards on these marches, shouting Hamas prescribed terrorist group chants, and indeed carrying their flag. Police failing to act, but then they will step in other situations. And this is where we get into really dangerous territory where, look, I'm a white middle-class woman. If I'm not on the side of the police and thinking the police are on my side, then good God, what is going on, okay? Yeah. And I don't feel that the police are on the right side on this stuff. I think they are taking sides. I think they're fearful. I think the police, they've lost control of many parts of this country. They are fearful of large groups of people. They are fearful of militant people like some of these pro-Palestinian agitators. And they are no longer in control of peace on our streets. That is scary.
It is an issue of multiculturalism in this country, that there is an idea that there has to be community cohesion by which all community leaders have to be consulted on everything. We hear this a lot with the police. They like to talk to the communities. Who decides who a community leader is? Who decides what the views of the community are? Very often when you have that kind of balkanization, it is people with vested interests who manage to worm their way to the top of these things.
Well, and in Muslim Council of Great Britain, it's largely men as well, self-appointed.
And men with a very strong...
We don't have a white atheist leader.
Well, I mean...
I don't have a community... I mean, Richard Dawkins, I don't have a white community leader.
Particularly religious. He's about to be your atheistic leader, and all the wonders that are going to come with that. But it is a serious point that, when it comes down to the question of the police deciding that actually we're not going to enforce the law equally, we're going to take the community's interests and what the community leaders, quote unquote, say. That's a problem. And then it becomes a question of who has the largest, most belligerent group. It's never going to be the Jewish community. It's going to be the people.
Basically, who's going to kick off?
Basically,
they're the people who get to have the final say. Well, again, I'm not saying I want people to kick off. Don't want anyone to break the law. But again, maybe more of us. I mean, I know I'm not very silent. Goodness me, my husband would love me to be occasionally. But maybe the silent, right-thinking majority should be speaking out and should be on the streets and making our voices heard. People have paid too much attention to people who go out in the streets. Other people have got lives and families and shopping to do, and they're not doing that. What do you make of the shadow Labour minister? I'm going to have to look his name up. We've all been Googling him. Imran Hussain. Who? I love it when these complete randos resign. He's resigned from the Labour front bench. I mean, no one's ever heard of him. No one knew. I'm surprised if Keir Starmer knew he was on his front bench, to be honest with you. But he's basically said he wants to be able to speak out and call for a ceasefire in Gaza. What do you make of this bizarre? I do think it's quite bizarre. These Labour MPs, the councillors in Burnley who all resigned as well, who seem to think that if the Labour leader doesn't call for the ceasefire in Gaza, that it's never going to happen, and that if he does, somehow that changes everything. As if Netanyahu and Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, they're going, oh, hold on a minute. Some councillors in Burnley and a Labour front bench guy no one's ever heard of, he's resigned. Oh, Keir Starmer's called for a ceasefire? Oh, well, in that case...
Calling for a ceasefire, a blanket ceasefire, is the easiest thing you can do if you're in opposition because it's never going to happen and you don't answer to anybody.
But aren't you a nice person?
The problem with Keir Starmer is he is probably going to be the Prime Minister and he is going to have to be the one who picks up the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu, but not just to Netanyahu, to our other allies. And if this is going to be the position of the Labour government, he's going to have to explain to our other allies, to Joe Biden, if he can remember who he's talking to, but he's going to be the one that's explaining, oh, actually, we're not going to give support to our allies. Sorry, but this is just how we feel. He's going to have to be the one making those tough decisions. And something else that I think is really important, we do need to ask Labour Party politicians about, Tories when it happens as well, but specifically Labour. Who are you working for? Whose interests are you representing? Your constituents, the nations, or the people of Gaza, the people of Palestine, the people of Israel, whatever it may be. I understand feeling very strongly about this, but actually your duty, first and foremost, is to your constituents. And actually it's your job as well to turn around to your constituents, even if they feel very strongly about this, and say, actually, there are more pressing things. We have massive issues with jobs or the NHS or whatever it is here that we need to address. It is not my job to go off in a huff just because you're upset.
On this stuff. And again, this is the sort of thing that Sadiq Khan does as well, the Labour mayor of London. Just constantly, it's like, mate, you've got problems in the city you're actually in charge of running. You should be focusing on that.
This is not what you're paid to do.
Exactly. Can I ask you about the King's speech as well? I mean, sorry. Oh, sorry. Just woken up. We watched it live. I mean, let's say the delivery was somewhat wooden. To be fair, so was the Queen's. That it was deliberately done. So they're speaking the King or the Queen. They're speaking the words of the Prime Minister, not their words. It's deliberately written, sort of be completely as dull as possible. But it was beyond dull. There wasn't anything that we didn't know about in advance in it. I mean, frankly, we were reduced to talking about Queen Camilla's train because there was so little in it. But
did it run on time?
Was this sort of government end of days? We're just not bothering anymore.
I think it's a really desperate state of affairs. It is drinking last orders in the last chance saloon. There is no grand vision coming from this administration. They are just sort of picking random policies that they think will play very well with certain constituencies and trying to cobble them together and thinking that this will be enough to get a sort of a coalition to maybe not have the worst wipeout at the next general election. And that, I think, is a real indictment of the lack of ideas that you have in the Conservative Party at the moment, that there is no unifying vision. You and I and your other guests, we constantly talk about the things that go wrong in this country and what could be done to improve them, be it, things like nuclear power, building houses. The ideas are out there. They just don't seem to have penetrated into number 10. And I think possibly they're just running scared of being Conservative. That's just, they just don't have the gumption to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there is that, isn't there? Can we talk about Rwanda? I do find it fascinating. When we saw, Italy, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, she has done a deal with Albania. Basically, if you arrive on a ship on the Med from Tunisia, it's largely where the people are coming from. You arrive, you ain't going to be going on Italian shore. We've got tens of thousands arriving in Lampedusa, virtually every week. You're going to be shipped off to Albania and then be processed there. And realistically, you're probably not going to ever make it to EU shores. Well, I mean, we'll see how that works out. But now we've got Olaf Scholz, the left-wing Chancellor of Germany, following what Austria has been looking at in terms of a Rwanda-style deal with a country outside the EU. I mean, I can't wait to hear all of the bleeding hearters in the UK kicking off about that, because when a Conservative government in Britain does it, they are racist, bigots, xenophobes, heartless. Sorry, tumbleweed going across my desk when it comes to another government doing it.
Right now, Pakistan is deporting. It is in the process of deporting 1.7 million Afghan people, and I have heard not a word of protest from any of the people who consider the British government to basically be the reincarnation of the Third Reich because it doesn't want to let everybody in. That is ultimately how a lot of countries operate, and I think Europe is waking up to the fact that if you just have hundreds of thousands, in Germany's case, hundreds of thousands of people who cross your border, they do not necessarily want to come to your country because they share your values. They just want a better time of it. Actually, you are going to have serious societal problems, upheaval. If you're not building enough housing, if you don't have enough resources, it's a problem. And you're going to have to do something with these people. And very often, that means sending them home. I'm
going to be fascinated to see if Labour get in next year, what they're going to do. I do want to talk about binge drinking before we get to texts and calls. But I mean, apparently, British women are among the worst when it comes to binge drinking in something like 38 countries. I mean, I've been putting my time in. But you know what they count as binge drinking?
Yeah.
If you drink 6 small glasses of small drinks, I'm assuming 1 unit, in the same sitting, more than once a month, I'm thinking, I mean, I would consider that a fairly moderate drink.
And that's where the problem starts, is that you consider it. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the women of the UK. You have to put up with the men of the UK. Of course,
That's
you're going to
true.
drink that
Your
amount.
moustaches.
Absolutely. It's a perfectly normal reaction to having to cohabit with
I love
people like
I
you.
love my life. I love my family. I love my job and everything. But genuinely, I can't do this life sober.
I
just think I think sobriety's overrated.
With a moustache like this, neither can I.
I mean, I'm